Today's sponsor is Audible.com, a leading provider of spoken audio information and entertainment. Listen to audiobooks whenever and wherever you want. Get a free audiobook of your choice at audiblepodcast.com/Mission Log.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Episode 123, Where Silence Has Lease.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Recording from an inescapable void of nothingness, as I tend to do. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm John Champion. Each week on Mission Log, we pick apart an episode of Star Trek, hunting for morals, meanings, and messages. For those in our audience who are disembodied, immortal alien intelligence, welcome. We hope you'll stick around for the 700 plus hours it takes for us to go through the entire franchise.
Today, Where Silence Has Lease. Though I hear it might be looking to buy, so it's kind of exciting.
Oh, good. Well, I hope their credit is good.
We'll walk them through, and we'll see what would it take to get you into this silence.
Into this void of nothingness.
Indeed. By the way, I can't believe I'm the only one recording from a void of nothingness. Seriously? I thought you and I know?
Well, it is Hollywood. So what more can you say, right?
Oh, so you just don't talk about it.
Right.
I see how it is. I see.
It's nothingness with a press agent. So.
Hey, speaking of things that we do talk about, I know it's one of your favorite things, and it's certainly something that people look forward to, myself included. I act curmudgeonly about it, but I look forward to John Champion bringing the trivia knowledge every week. Won't you please lay some down for us today?
Ken, I've got a tremendous amount of trivia for you today. Some of it very interesting because some of it delves into historical stuff as well. Today's episode was written by Jack Sowards. Now, he also wrote Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And you may be saying, but Nick Meyer wrote The Wrath of Khan. And you would be right as well. So Jack was hired by Harve Bennett after Bennett had already written a script in which Kirk and his son team up to battle Khan. Sowards had a script about the ultimate weapon, first called the Omega, then called the Genesis device. Nick Meyer took those elements that he liked and formed them into the script that he directed. Now, I'm going to get this name wrong, but Weinrich Kolb directed, and that is a name to get used to, as badly as I may pronounce it, since we will be seeing more of it in The Next Generation, and other versions of Star Trek. Other genre credits include Battlestar Galactica, Knight Rider. He even directed Shatner in a few episodes of T.J. Hooker, and he dated an actress named Kate Mulgrew for a few years. We will learn more about her later as well. And unfortunately, both Sowards and Kolb passed away in 2007. Now, the title of today's episode comes from the poem The Spell of the Yukon by Robert W. Service. Service worked for the Canadian Bank of Commerce, and they relocated him to the Yukon. So what do? Well, if you're in the Yukon, you write poems. And in today's episode, we meet a facsimile of the USS Yamato, the sister ship of the Enterprise. Now, the Yamato, named after the World War II flagship of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Yamato is kind of a mythic warship, and she sank in 1945 after a fierce battle. And Ken, I found this story to be incredibly interesting. I always like to find out the names of the ships that we meet in Star Trek because, well, they typically are named after ships from Earth history for real. And the Yamato is one that I didn't know too much about. And I found this bit of her last mission to be so incredibly strange that I had to share it. Operation Ten-Go would have had the Japanese fleet go from Tokuyama to Okinawa, where they were to take on the Allied forces. And it was an insane plan because basically the Japanese Navy would have taken everything they had, including the Yamato, and only given it enough fuel for a one-way trip. At which point, the Yamato and the other ships were supposed to drive full speed and beach themselves in order to become unsinkable weapons platforms. So the idea is they just pull right up onto the beach. They can't get sunk, and they just fire everything that they have. Now, the Allies intercepted the message before this could happen. So everything that the Allied forces had took on this Japanese fleet as it was on its way to Okinawa, and the Yamato was sunk. It is interesting to know that planes from the USS Enterprise had engaged with the Yamato before, but the Yamato managed to stick it out through multiple battles before meeting the ultimate demise during Operation 10 Go. Fewer than 300 of more than the 3,000 men on the Yamato were saved in that last battle. Earl Bowen plays the character Nagilum, and he is an extremely busy character actor with a couple of hundred credits to his name. Been working steadily since the 1970s, and you may remember him as Dr. Peter Silberman in the Terminator films. And the character Nagilum was actually named for actor Richard Mulligan. Nagilum is Mulligan spelled backwards, who was originally desired for the role.
I'm sorry, Richard Mulligan from Soap?
Yeah, Richard Mulligan. Yeah, that Richard Mulligan.
Richard Mulligan from Empty Nest?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been...
very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, probably not, because, I mean, you don't really see his face. And
yeah, you just sort of see the lips moving
My
around.
assumption is he can actually do a straight read, or he could. I'm assuming that Richard Mulligan has actually passed away at this point. I don't know. It's sort of terrible to assume, isn't it? He might be listening right now going, what the heck? Sorry. He was a great comedic actor, though. He was also one of Blake Edwards' favorites.
Oh, right. Yeah.
He was in SOB, and I can't remember what else, but a few other Blake Edwards. I think of him as just being wacky. Tremendous physical comedy on Soap as well.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
That would have been this could have been the wackiest episode of Star Trek ever.
And Ken, finally, Ensign Haskell was played by Charles Douglas. I really hope you didn't get too attached to him.
Yeah, I was excited because he was a named character. And usually when you get named characters, I'm thinking, oh, well, they're going to be around, until like Act 3, maybe.
No.
No, sort of.
No.
Oh, Ensign Haskell, we hardly knew ye.
Yeah. Ken, before we get to today's story, we do want to mention our new sponsor again, Audible.com. Audible has one of the largest libraries of spoken audio digital downloads for users, over 150,000 titles. Users can sign up as Audible listeners, and you can get book credits each month for a low monthly fee. But Ken, better than that, Mission Log listeners have the ability to get a free audio download from audible.com by going to audiblepodcast.com/missionlog. And what's great is they have a ton of Star Trek titles to pick from. Now, you and I are talking about the next generation, so our listeners may want to pick a next generation story to supplement their listening to Mission Log. What's great, some of the Peter David novels that are spinoffs from Next Generation, we have Imzadi 1 and Imzadi 2. Maybe you wanted to follow along with a story, an actual story from Next Generation. Reunion, which is adapted for audio format. You can download that story. Contamination, you can download that story. More spinoffs like Q in Law, also by Peter David. Relic, if you wanted to sort of jump the timeline, as it were, and listen to that story before we get to it. And you can get it for free by going to audiblepodcast.com/missionlog. Just a ton of Star Trek titles, Ken.
Yeah. And some other really fun titles, too, like Being with Dying, Cultivating Compassion and Fearlessness in the Presence of Death, Fear of Death, Overcome Your Fear of Dying with Hypnosis, and As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, which is probably not actually one that belongs on that list, but...
I sense a little bit of a theme there for you, Ken.
I don't know. It's, something about today's show. I can't say what it is exactly, but something about it. I will say, actually, aside from the death and dying stuff and the Star Trek stuff, one of my favorite things on Audible has always been some of the radio plays that you can get. Like, you can download the Hitchhikers radio plays on Audible. Mm-hmm. And it's if you haven't listened to those, or if you haven't listened to those in a long time, I highly recommend those too. Science fiction, yes, not Star Trek. but just a tremendous amount of fun. Plus, you'll probably start getting like at least 5 more jokes per episode if you listen to those from our show. So,
well, we know that our listeners are well-read and very thoughtful, and that this just gives them more opportunity to pick up more interesting content. So again, audiblepodcast.com/mission log and get your free audio download today.
Man looks in the abyss. There is nothing staring back at him. Man flies a starship into the abyss, and there is a weird sort of snake-looking thing staring back at him. I may not be doing the episode justice.
Prologue. The Enterprise may be on a boring old charting mission, but Worf is in the holodeck testing his warrior skills. Along for the training is Riker, who gets to see his comrade in action, battling a vicious holo creation. Even when the simulation ends, Worf seems a bit bloodthirsty until Riker calls him off. Act 1. Back to all that fun charting an unvisited region of space, the Morgana Quadrant, and Data finds a whole bunch of nothing. Literally, somewhere out there is a hole in space. There's nothing there, no energy, no light, no mass, nothing. Data says there's no record of anything remotely like it, regardless of Klingon myths or even the more mythical missions of James Kirk. Cool. Let's go in for a closer look. The Enterprise gets closer, and to be cautious, Picard orders a probe to be launched. In mere seconds, the probe disappears. No trace of it. Worf is getting a little antsy. He's thinking about that Klingon legend that Data had never heard of, the one about the void in space that eats spaceships. He wants a yellow alert, but Picard sees no need for alarm. He'll just launch another probe and same thing. No probe, no nothing. The Enterprise edges a little closer, but this time a little too close. Before they know it, the crew find themselves and their ship surrounded by the vastness of nothing. Act 2. Welcome to the void. We got nothing to the left, more nothing to the right, and up ahead the pitch book for Seinfeld. No one knows what quite to do. Ship systems are normal. Data speculates that the lack of dimension may be a dimension unto itself. No time for new age hippie nonsense, though. Time to get out of here and back to something other than nothing. Picard orders a reverse course. The Enterprise leaps away and nothing. Seriously, there is so much nothing. Data and Wesley both confirmed that they should have traveled quite a distance now, definitely past where they entered the void, but there's just an ungodly amount of nothing everywhere you look. In what he hopes will be a maneuver to outsmart the nothingness, Data drops a stationary beacon for the Enterprise to track. Ahead, warp 2, and we're back in front of the stationary beacon that was behind us. Can't win for trying. If nothing was getting boring, though, something just showed up. A Romulan bird of prey. The Romulan ship opens fire, but with one photon torpedo, the Enterprise destroys it. Way too easy. And when it goes, it really goes away. No debris or anything. Without warning, another ship appears. This time it's friendly, the USS Yamato. She looks friendly enough, but there is no reply to hails and no sign of life. Riker volunteers himself and Worf to go have a look. Act 3, on board the Yamato, things are not as they seem. Worf and Riker materialize absolutely not where they intended, and they're in different parts of the ship. Upon finding each other, thinking the other is in trouble, they make their way to the bridge. Bridges. All the bridges. On this ship, bridges just seem to be everywhere, and this is really messing with Worf's head. It's almost like someone is deliberately messing with them. It looks like the Yamato, but it definitely is not. On board the Enterprise, the power dims but comes back just when an escape hole appears in the void. Too bad about the timing, since Worf and Riker can't be beamed back. When the hole disappears, systems are back online, though, which means that Riker and Worf can come back home after all. As they beam over, the fake Yamato fades into oblivion. Having just had his mind messed with, Riker's had enough. He's perturbed and ready to leave. Act 4. A few more holes in the void appear, but as soon as the Enterprise can set course, they disappear. It's becoming an annoying game, and Deanna chimes in that she senses a kind of intelligence that she hadn't picked up before. It's almost like they're being observed for some kind of experiment. Picard orders a dead stop. They won't play into anyone's experiment. That clue everyone suddenly got must have been just the right thing to make their tormentor appear. A huge, disembodied face and voice appears on the view screen and introduces itself as Nagilum. Data says there's nothing there, but there he is. Nagilum sizes up the crew on the bridge. There's Data, who's not like the others, and there's Dr. Pulaski, who is female. He'd like a demo of how humans make more humans, but Picard is really ready to just go home. Nagilum is also having a difficult time with the concept of mortality and death. As another experiment, he kills crewman Haskell right there in front of everyone. Interesting, Nagilum discovers. He would like to understand death a little more, all types of death, and announces to Picard that his next experiment will only use about a third of the Enterprise crew. Act 5. This is quite a pickle for Picard. We have a ship stuck in a void, and we have a Nagilum who is ready to kill a good chunk of the crew. What to do? Picard and Riker go to engineering, where they initiate the Enterprise auto-destruct. If Nagilum won't reason with them, then he can't have any of them. They choose a 20-minute interval before destruction, and in the meantime, Picard relaxes in his quarters. He's soon visited by Deanna and Data. They both have reasons to dissuade Captain from going through with the auto-destruct. Deanna says it won't solve anything. Data is more philosophical. He wants to know what death is. Picard tries to explain, but the more he talks to them, the more he realizes something is wrong. His crew wouldn't try to talk him out of a decision. These two are manifestations from Nagilum. As soon as Picard calls him on it, a message from the real Lieutenant Data from the bridge comes through. The Enterprise is no longer in the void. Great. Time to turn off that auto-destruct. Well, not so fast. Picard orders the Enterprise to pull away, but Picard lets the clock tick down a little more. He's not so sure that this isn't an illusion, too. With a few seconds left, Picard and Riker cancel today's brush with death. In his ready room, Picard talks to open space, telling Nagilum he hopes he got what he needed. Nagilum actually shows up on Picard's computer, ready to share the results of his test. He finds humans a ball of contradiction, but Picard points out that they share the trait of curiosity. Until next time, the end.
It was great. I can't believe you didn't mention this in trivia, by the way. It was great to see Skeletor getting work again.
Yeah, we missed him. Yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
This was actually supposed to be his breakout role because he was typecast before this as sort of like an evil thing with a skull head. And sadly, he just ended up playing an evil thing with a skull head. But still, it was good to see him. Good to see him try.
It was a little weird. He's got a little bit of a skull head, a little bit of like an animal face, a little bit of an alien. I mean, there's a lot going on there. And then I like how the lips don't always line up with the face.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, wait, are you talking now about Nagilum or are you talking about Skeletor?
Oh, I'm talking about Nagilum.
Oh, yeah, okay. I was talking about the thing on the holodeck.
Yeah. That. Oh, of course.
It was 100% Skeletor.
Oh, he was 100% Skeletor. Yeah.
No, I like you actually didn't mention this part in the recap, and why would you? But Nagilum, I mean, for all of his I'm awesome and I can span the universe and I'll live forever. He can't draw very well. Because he appears to them and they're like, "Whoa, that's ugly." In fact, Geordi actually says, "Whoa, that's ugly." Or words to that effect. And Nagilum's like, "What? I tried so hard to look just like you." And he's he looks more like a snake, honestly, but with like human eyes and a mouth that kind of moves around.
Yeah, not very good.
Without the rest of the, what we'll go ahead and call a head, for the sake of Nagilum's trying.
Right. Yes. I like that we open the show without a captain's log. Like we enter into this sort of troubling feel on the bridge, but then it's all about the holodeck program and Worf's psyche, which I thought was a little bit of a letdown. If Worf is really that dangerous, he needs counseling. But I just sort of like the mood when we entered the show, and it was just sort of quiet. Yeah, we go right into it.
Although I'm going to say they're messing with me again. I now have to completely rescind my rule that if the holodeck is mentioned in the prologue, or is present in the prologue,
Yeah.
then that's going to be a big part of the show because, there's stuff going on the holodeck, and then, we're done with the holodeck for the rest of the show.
Yeah, yeah. Although it could have been a bigger part of the show. I want to come back to that regarding Worf.
Okay.
But yeah. It could have been. It could have indicated something else, but it didn't.
Yeah, it just like we'll get to the part about about the fact that they're facing death down through this whole episode, but initially, so look, there's a big bowl of nothing over there. And it's over there, and we're over here. So let's keep looking at it from over here. We'll get a little bit closer. Oh, it's all around us now. Yeah. Well, let's chat. Right. I don't understand. I mean, they were so like nonchalant about that whole thing. It's like, this is kind of crazy. It reminds me of the time that we thought there was a place where there was absolutely nothing. Yeah, back in the day, they would have killed you, Captain, for taking us here. Good times.
Right.
Well, let's keep sitting here.
Although, to their credit, though, they are on a charting mission, and they're exploring. Yeah. So if there's a whole lot of nothing, well, let's go check out that whole lot of nothing and see how it relates to something.
Okay, but once the whole lot of nothing, wraps itself around you.
Yeah, then it's okay, time to go.
At that point, I mean, don't you think you then immediately go, can we get away from this? Because they were there for quite a while before they were like, all right, fun's over.
Yeah.
Because personally, I think fun was over.
Right.
The second the thing, sort of hugged the Enterprise too hard.
Yeah. Worf is very worked up about everything in this episode. It's funny, I mentioned this episode to somebody, and their reply to it was just one bridge. It's like the memorable thing from this. Well, Worf, your ship has two. You do have two bridges on your Enterprise.
They do, but they're not identical, and they're not right next to each other.
No.
I mean, it was like they were playing... I mean, for any gamers out there, it's like they were playing Portal.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It looked cool. I like those effects.
Yeah. It was a big mess with your head moment, though.
Yeah. All right, so Nagilum notices that Dr. Pulaski is female. He somehow missed Deanna, who was right there. Yeah. Standing right next to Picard.
He also noticed that Data was different than the rest of them, but somehow missed Worf.
Yeah. Who's different? Yeah.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Nagilum.
Very, very strange. And Nagilum, he wants a demo of propagating the species. And again, I just felt like, the guy could read a book. Or maybe he's just a perv. Maybe he's just a big space perv.
He could be. I mean, here's the thing, because he does know who everybody is. Mm-hmm. So my assumption is he's picking that up how? Did he read the ship's records, or is he getting that psychically? Because if he read the ship's records, he could go ahead and access the library and figure out everything he wants to know.
Yeah.
Or if he's doing it psychically, then he's got to have some understanding of death, because while the people on the bridge may be cool as cucumbers, there had to be people that, below decks. Somebody out of 1,000 people, somebody on that ship had to be worried about dying at that point.
Oh, that would have been me. I'd have been freaking out in the lower decks. Yeah.
Maybe not, though, because maybe they wouldn't have even told you yet. Maybe you wouldn't even know.
Oh, well,
is it dark outside? You would be saying, and then, I'd be next to you going, it's always dark outside, idiot, we're in space.
Space.
Keep peeling potatoes. They don't peel themselves. Or,
yeah.
That's what I assume we would be doing on the Enterprise.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, at the end of the day, I wondered if Nagilum was really as short-sighted as he seems. Was he calling Picard's bluff, which was not a bluff? Would he really have killed that much more of the crew? I mean, I suppose since he already killed one, sure, we are to believe that he would have just gone through and killed a bunch of them. But then I wondered, could he have brought Haskell back? Does he have, he certainly seems more powerful than Q. So could he have just snapped his non-existent nothingness fingers and brought back Haskell? If Picard had made a case for it and said, man, we really need Haskell back, but he didn't.
Yeah, I don't. First of all, I don't know what makes you think he's more powerful than Q. We've seen no limit to Q's power to this point, so why you think this guy's more powerful, I don't know. And
I got that impression, yeah.
And why?
I don't know. I just said maybe because it's such a giant face.
Yeah, I was going to say, he can't even look like this. I mean, to me,
right.
I doubt he would get half the jokes that Q would get.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not. It didn't occur to me that it was more powerful. In fact, I wondered why there was no mention of Q in this episode, because I mean they do strike me as similar in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to mention this, the captain, as we, were talking about those lower decks crewmen who are just waiting for the auto-destruct to go off. The captain just sort of making the decision of who lives and who dies. And it is like, let this be your last battlefield. The stakes are real, and the order just came from the bridge. And how many people are thinking, I did not sign up for this? Yeah. And how interesting and cavalier that we come up with a time frame like 20 minutes.
Yeah. Let me do two things really quickly.
Sure. Yeah.
It's let that be your last battlefield.
Oh, did I? Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah. I just want to stop the letters. I just want to stop the letters before they happen.
Yeah.
I'm also a little bit confused. We've apparently had an upgrade to the auto-destruct sequence since season 1, because it seems like in season 1, everything was really hardwired, right? Didn't they have like 15 minutes and they had to get to the bridge and they both had to stand there and do a certain thing and say an incantation or whatever?
Right.
Because you joked about the fact, you were like, man, I wanted to see Riker just lose it and go, yes, turn off the auto-destruct. And I was like, yeah, he does that at some point. Yeah, welcome to that. I actually really... There was a neat bit of understated, I don't want to go so far as to say comedy in this, but Jean-Luc Picard is cool all the way through this episode. He's like Fonzie cool. I mean, he's just not losing it. Except Fonzie occasionally lost it even. The only thing I can think to compare him to, honestly, is Jean-Luc Picard. That's how cool he is in this episode. Because Riker's like, because Picard lets it count down to like the last 5 seconds before they're going to auto-destruct. And he says, all right, cancel the auto-destruct. And then the computer says, hey, Riker, do you agree? And Riker's like, yes, absolutely agree, 100%. Please don't blow us up. And Picard turns to him and goes, a simple yes would have sufficed, number one. It's a very cute sort of understated moment. But yeah, you got that moment that you asked for there. But going back, though, it seems like we had a very limited amount of time. Wasn't it like 15 minutes from engineering to get up to the bridge, or like 10 minutes or something? It was a very short amount of time that they had to get back up to the bridge and turn the whole thing off. And this time they're like, what do you think? Like, should we give them a day? What do you think? 5 minutes? How long? It's like, oh, no, let's give them time to thoroughly prepare for death. 20 minutes? Can't tell you I'm spending like 20 minutes every waking hour at this point. At least kind of thinking about that stuff every now and then. For somebody to come to me and go, hey, well, 20 minutes. This is your 20-minute warning. Get settled with, everything.
What do I watch on the DVR?
Exactly.
What do I just what do you do with that time? You don't.
Plus, did they even get on the ship's intercom and make an all call? Are you and I still below decks like peeling potatoes, not even knowing that this is happening?
That's what I'm worried about. That is absolutely what I'm worried about, because there didn't seem to be an announcement. Does it just show up on a screen somewhere and you go, wait a minute, is this a glitch? Or because I was just reading this other thing that I have to do for work and now this pops up.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Dude, have you prepared for everything? What? Didn't you get the email? What? I was going to check the email. I'm busy. They're not going to peel themselves.
Really terrible about the death events in Haskell. There hasn't been a death that senseless on Star Trek since. Oh. That woman. The blonde. She stood next to Worf. Good fighter. Had some anger issues. The one. That guy from the planet in Code of Honor.
Speaking of Q, as we were earlier, I found myself actually thinking about Hyde and Q with this episode, and it was all around Data. I love Data's ability to hang with the idea that something doesn't make sense, and yet it is. And I guess it's because he is Data. He doesn't get hung up on whether something should be or shouldn't be. I mean, he's looking at it and he's like, well, it is. No, I don't understand it, but it is. So now it's becoming part of the Data set, I suppose. And I don't mean to keep using his name in that way. In Hyde and Q, he wondered whether the world or planet to which Q had taken them was real. And we had somebody write in and say that maybe it was the act of observation, making it real, making it not real. I personally thought that Data was actually open to the possibility that they were some place that did not physically exist, because that's the kind of power that Q had. And here we are again in sort of a similar situation. This, where they are, should not be possible. There's no energy, there's no matter, there's no boundary to it. It shouldn't be possible. It is, in fact, impossible. And yet, so was Q, and it turns out so is, Nagilum in a way. He doesn't understand death. Why doesn't he understand death? Because there's no such thing for Nagilum. Mm-hmm. It's like, wow, so you guys stopped being at some point, huh? Totally weird. Now, I don't know how, Nagilum doesn't know that he won't stop being at some point, but maybe he just hasn't got there yet.
Right.
So here's this thing that's not a thing. And going back to what we were saying about Audible earlier, it's a bit like Hot Black Desiato's ship from the restaurant at the end of the universe. It's just there's no surface, there's no friction. It's just, you ask yourself, how much more black could it be? And that's a whole other reference. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And honestly, so you were, I don't know, you seem bothered earlier by Worf's freak out, but honestly, I thought Data's like just, okay, well, here's more stuff that now exists, is what a great counterbalance to Worf's totally losing it on the Yamato. And there was something else, forgive me, because I know I'm skipping. There was another great thing that happened on the Yamato. So Worf goes crazy on the holodeck, but that's okay, because Worf goes into the holodeck every day to go crazy. It's part of his calisthenics, he says. Maybe, the one or two times I've done calisthenics, I was doing it wrong, but whatever. Worf goes insane, right? And the only thing that brings him back is Riker saying, "At ease, Lieutenant," like yelling at him, basically snapping him out of it.
Yeah.
But it turns out that that's kind of what's keeping Riker sane as well, because when they're on the Yamato, Worf starts going absolutely nuts, and then he actually sort of starts saying to himself, half as a reminder, half as almost like a mantra, "At ease, Lieutenant, at ease, Lieutenant." Okay, so he calms himself down. And it's like what's kept Riker in check the whole time is being at the top of the org chart, is being in command. Because when they get off the Yamato and back to the Enterprise, Riker loses it on Picard.
He does.
Which is kind of, it was a bunch of interesting character study in this episode, I would say. It feels like there's something from each character. Well, not each character, because there are some characters don't get a whole lot. Like, why didn't Deanna, tell him when she... Oh, I didn't think there was anything, but maybe there is. It's Picard who has to say higher level of consciousness. Okay. But, right. I mean, from a lot of the characters, there's some really interesting stuff. I feel like I just way rambled at you, but there you go.
Interesting stuff, except Haskell, because he really had no input on any of it at all.
That's true.
We did not get his opinion on Nagilum at all, though we can speculate what it would be.
Well, unless you count... as that. Honestly, I was afraid we were going to have another Remix head debris moment.
Oh, yeah. It almost seemed like that.
Nobody owes anybody money for that mention, by the way.
No.
That one's free.
Yeah, there you go, Barry. So I want to talk about the Data thing, because I do think that is very interesting that you brought up, and it kind of makes me think about the notes that I had taken about Data in this. This says something about Data's programming, and clearly it's probably all due to Dr. Soong, who will figure out more about how he programmed Data later on. But hopefully, but there's something about Data here that has a tinge of philosophy, so that he can hold on to these nonsensical ideas, these things that are not just black and white, that are not just data for data's sake. The fact that you brought that up in Hide Q, speculating whether or not the planet was real, trying to speculate what this nothingness is, I thought that was all really cool stuff. And he possesses a kind of like fuzzy logic. And I hate to compare Data to a rice maker, but the first time I ever heard of fuzzy logic as being a thing that is implemented in technology was with really fancy rice makers. The idea being that, well, you have a normal rice maker, you can turn it on or off, and it gets to a certain point and it says, okay, your rice is done. But if you have a fuzzy logic rice maker, It can do things like determine, well, what kind of rice do you have? How much liquid actually is there? What is the correct cooking time for this particular batch of rice, as opposed to just being in a state of on or off? So yes, I just compared Data to a rice maker, but a very fancy rice maker, because he can do things more than just be on or off. I
have a Schrodinger's rice maker, by the way.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
It's always done, and it's never quite finished.
And it's never quite finished.
As long as I don't open it, it is perfect.
You'll never know. Yeah. It's always both.
I'm actually, and maybe we're just sort of crossing on the terminology here, but I almost don't think of Data's logic as being fuzzy logic. Quite the contrary. Worf understands that he should not be able to walk through that door, and in walking out of this room, walk into the room that he just walked out of. Going the one direction, right? Unless he turned around, which he doesn't do.
Right.
It is his understanding that that's not how things work. And so even when things are working that way, that doesn't make sense to him. Things don't work that way. Well, they are working that way. Well, they don't. Well, they are. Black and white, they're working that way. Because they've never worked that way before, Worf can't handle it. Data almost feels more black and white to me. Because he's going to go ahead. He's going to accept that because he's sort of not encumbered by perception. He learns and he can apply things that have happened in the past. But when things change, things have changed now. So this is something I've never encountered before. This is completely different. And yet this is the way things are. I think I would argue that his logic is the least fussy of anyone's, because the way things are the way things are to Data the second they are that way. Whereas it takes everybody else, time to, stop losing their minds about it.
Well, but, Data would have been curious about the multiple bridges, and he would have tried to figure out what was going on. And if it meant leaving something at another bridge, kind of like leaving the probe in the vastness of the void. He's trying to figure out a logical way around the program, but Data can accept the idea that there are things that he can't explain. He can accept the idea that this shouldn't be, and yet it is.
Right.
So he can accept a paradox better than Worf can. Say,
right.
I love that line. I wrote it down in my notes. Is that the thought exercise about science and scientific exploration? Data saying early on that the start of knowledge is the statement "I do not know," and he specifically without a contraction there. And then we get a reference to that again with that discussion between Riker and Picard with, beyond this place, there be dragons. The idea that I forget exactly how Kirk put it, but he said there is no unknown. There are only things that are temporarily unknown, that they will actually go try to figure out what that thing is. We get another reference to this scientific experiment of the whole show with Geordi's statement about being rats in a trap. It's a funny line saying, keep the cheese. I just went out of the trap. And Nagilum is curious, but his experiments are detrimental. He is an unethical scientist, shall we say. And I had to wonder about his methods, because he can apparently see and hear everything. I'm going to bring this back to the idea of what was going on in Picard's head as well. He's timeless and doesn't understand death, which I thought was a little strange, because surely in exploring and experimenting with other species and other things in the universe, he would have come across this idea before that things have matter, things have a lifespan, things change or evolve.
Right, assuming that he is actually the thing that Worf was talking about in Legend of a darkness that would envelop whole ships, then, these can't be the first corporeal beings.
Right. And he can communicate with us, but he didn't bother to read, I guess, all of our notes, all of our library. Even Khan did that. He read everything in the library, as much as he could get his hands on anyway. So it was a little strange. We have another godlike, super advanced alien being to contend with. And the final message of which, again, seems to be stay away because you are totally not ready to handle this. But it made me wonder in this whole guessing game between Nagilum and Picard. Picard decides he's going to blow up the ship. Mm-hmm. Was there a place in the back of Picard's mind at all that said, I may not have to blow up the ship because even if I'm not bluffing that I really will do it, there may come a point where I don't have to, because if Nagilum lets me go, then I will turn off the auto-destruct. And then it just becomes this game of chicken until the Enterprise either does or does not blow up, until Nagilum decides to let them go or not let them go. So if that thought had been somewhere in the back of Picard's head, I feel like Nagilum could have read that thought as well. You know?
Interesting.
Because I got the impression that Nagilum was reading their minds.
Well, one assumes that Nagilum was... You'd think that he would have been reading their minds because he does call everybody by name. Mm-hmm. Now, he also calls Data by name. But did he just hear Picard call Data? Is that why he addressed Data specifically? Because Data was odd and he wasn't getting a reading off of him? Or is he just so smart that he can pick up on everyone?
It could have been that he just picked up on everyone. I also assumed that he had been rifling through the Enterprise library at some point. You know, here's this thing that comes in, and it takes Nagilum very little time to figure out what this object is and that it has a computer. I mean, we already had another alien being that would communicate with the Enterprise computer because it saw the Enterprise computer as an entity that it could interact with. So for Nagilum, I would almost think that he would see the Enterprise computer as another intelligence. It just happens to be that this intelligence is the vessel in which all these other beings are contained. So even if you wanted to get rid of all the people on board, this might still be an object of curiosity because he can glean information from it. But then what is the point of gleaning the information if you just destroy it or destroy the people on board? So...
See, you're wondering whether it was in the back of Picard's mind whether he was actually going to have to destroy the ship or not. I'm actually wondering if Nagilum... I mean, he did kill the one guy.
Yeah.
Haskell?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't forget Haskell.
He did kill the one guy. Was he really going to kill everybody else, though? Or was this... I mean, was Haskell like the necessary sort of prod to learn what he wanted to learn about humans? I mean, maybe he wasn't actually planning on killing a third of them. I mean, there's no indication that he wasn't planning on it, but I mean, you know, if he could just kill one and find out what he really wanted to know. Because I thought it was kind of weird that he was like, oh, I want to find out about all the different ways to die. It'll only take a third of your crew. Well, listen, I'm no, genocidal maniac, but I don't think killing 333 people is actually going to tell you everything. Now, maybe because Nagilum doesn't understand death, he doesn't, understand, that there might be 334 ways to do that. And he might have to come back to Picard and go, it turns out I'm going to need half to 3/4 of your crew. Is that going to be a problem?
Right.
It's possible, though, that he used the one guy, that he sacrificed the one guy to find out how everybody would react to not existing, as opposed to really wanting to just, kill a bunch of people to see exactly how it happens each time.
Yeah. Yeah, I wondered about both. I wondered about what really was in Nagilum's mind about that. What was that the experiment is to see how they deal with the threat of death. And then it made me wonder about what was going on in Picard's mind. And it was cool that Picard at the conference table, he shoots Pulaski that look that just says like, oh, I am dead serious. And at that point, Riker pretty much has to be on board with it. So even if there is that point in the back of Picard's mind that says, maybe we won't have to go through with this, as far as Riker knows, they're going through with it. Yeah. And as far as everybody else on board knows, they're going through with it. Well, so maybe that's enough for Nagilum.
As far as everybody in the ready room knows.
Right. Right. Yeah.
We still don't know about everybody else.
Yeah. Still had to get the message out.
Sort of along those lines, I found it interesting when Nagilum tried to turn Picard. When Nagilum tried to change Picard's mind. And this is actually what kind of gets me wondering whether Nagilum planned to kill anybody else or if he was just, testing how they deal with it. Nagilum sends in Troy, who is the most emotionally in tune among them, and Data, the one tuned most to logic and least to emotion. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of interesting he does that. It reminded me a bit actually of the old ethos, pathos, logos idea that you proposed way back in the original series.
Slow clap. Yeah.
The thing is, though, you've got more principles on the Next Generation, so I don't you don't get sort of the Kirk, Spock, McCoy triumvirate of ethos, pathos, logos. It seems to me that those roles actually get passed around. From different two different people at different times.
I agree.
Or different characters at different times. But it was kind of neat to see that we had this totally emotional, and she wasn't like crazy hyper emotional. She wasn't Worf totally emotional. Mm-hmm. But you have this totally emotional plea for, hey, let's not die, and this totally logical plea for, hey, let's not die. And the problem is the blending of them in Picard is like, yeah, but we still got to die.
Yeah, right. Well, and I kind of felt there for a moment that it was a good ploy, and it was a good way to do an experiment from Nagilum's point of view. Mm-hmm. But then does Nagilum come away going, man, this guy is crazy. So, because maybe the experiment was, can this leader be persuaded to be compassionate, or can he be persuaded to something else other than his directive? So Nagilum's thinking at the end, wow, not going to mess with this guy anymore.
He sends a big, omnipotent, anonymous letter to Starfleet.
Right.
Saying, you may want to reconsider.
You have a sociopath running the ship. He is so ready with his finger on that button.
That's a fun idea.
I want to change gears just a little bit, just slightly from our conversation, because it ties in some here. But we got, well, when I say we, me, I got a few comments from listeners calling me out privately and publicly for liking Pulaski. We had this conversation on the last episode because I said, hey, I like Pulaski. And there were a few outraged or shocked comments about that. But I want to clarify that because I want to blend that into the conversation about how she acts in this episode, too. Here's the thing that I like about the Pulaski character, that she's rough around the edges. She's prejudiced in ways that we haven't seen before on this show where presumably from the beginning, everybody gets along, you know, and I'm intrigued by this. We've had little to no conflict so far among the crew, and it's kind of nice to see someone who doesn't fit. So that's what I mean by that. I don't mean that every trait that she has is admirable, and I don't mean that every trait she has is something that we should celebrate on the show, but it gives us something to explore in a character. So then let's talk about her treatment of Data in this episode, because on the surface you're like, oh, that's horrible. How dare she treat Data this way? She calls him it. And then she corrects herself by referencing the service record, which classifies him as alive. So she's rude, to be sure. Yeah. But I also think that she's having a pretty normal reaction that a lot of people would face and maybe will face in the not so distant future with androids. You've got to put this together in your head, the way you interact with these androids, beings, creatures, robots, however you're going to decide to put these into your say accessibility to other people and other technology around you. Pulaski sees Data as a toaster with shoes, but he talks, he thinks, and he is more than capable of any task that is handed to him. This will make humans uneasy. There's no question about it. Now, we've been presented with this enlightened crew so far that accepts him readily, and they see every single day Data's abilities. And we accept him as an audience because Star Trek already accepts him. You know, we've already seen an entire season where we get to accept Data as just one of the crew. So I'm intrigued by Pulaski's reaction because I want to see her deal with it. and it doesn't make me want to write her off as a character.
Hey, you know what the Enterprise needs? Headlights.
Comes that time in the show when we do that thing we do, try to figure out the messages, morals, and meanings of the given episode, and whether the whole thing stands the test of time. Where's Silence Has Lease? Mr. Champion, I ask you, does this episode hold up?
There's a lot that I like about it. I really love the kind of Twilight Zone feel of this episode, particularly as they're exploring the mystery of the void in space, the other ship, the multiple bridges, all of that stuff. It was a great dramatic way to just mess with people's heads. So I really dug that quite a lot. And here's a show that almost entirely takes place on the bridge, which is a really hard thing to do and make it dramatic and interesting. But they did it. You know, we've talked about that concept before of a bottle show where you pretty much just are stuck on that set because you can't afford to go to a location or build another set that week. I hadn't mentioned before in the trivia, but this is as good a place as any to mention it, that by season 2, they changed the way that they budgeted the shows. So they would borrow against another show later in the season. So if they knew, okay, when we get to this other thing, that will cost us a lot because we got to build alien costumes and we have to build an alien ship and we got to order more visual effects and blah, blah, blah. We'll borrow against that. So we will not do a show that will cost as much now, rather than just saying, OK, each show is budgeted at, $1.5 million or whatever it is. They would actually play a little more fast and loose with how that money got spread out. So this is a good way to do this, where you have very few visual effects, certainly some, and some that are very good, and then no new sets to deal with. So it was very effective in that respect. And I think for the most part, it does hold up. Now, I do have a disappointment with this episode, and I felt like the through line with Worf. So we open with him in battle on the holodeck, and we reveal something about his psychology. And then he kind of freaks out on the bridge. He's like, "Oh, we got to go to yellow alert. We got to," and Picard calls him on it. And he kind of, puts the leash on Worf there for a moment. And then he freaks out again on the simulated Yamato, just tearing at the door. There's one bridge. And we have all these moments that seem to be leading up to something about Worf, about how he sees the world, how he fits into his crew, wherever you want to go with it. But then I feel like it doesn't go anywhere. By the time we get to the end of the episode, we've pretty much forgotten Worf as a character. So we're relieved that no one blows up at the end of the show, that this nice new ship doesn't have to go anywhere. But we introduced these angles on Worf that had no follow through. Now, I know that we're only on season 2, episode 2, but judging the episode just by itself, it seemed like a lot of effort to build up Worf, but not really have a payoff.
Well, not at the end of the 44 to 48 minutes, but I mean, one of the things that we've already established, even just at, episode 2 of season 2 of Star Trek The Next Generation, is it remembers that there was episode 1 of season 2, and it remembers that there was a season 1 as well. So, I mean, you're right. You're not getting the payoff at the end of the 44 minutes, but think about how many times we learned something about a character. We saw some real growth for a character in the original series, and then we reset the clock to 0 and we start again next week.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, we learned a lot about Worf, and maybe it's a difference, and I think we talked about this a lot in the original series. Maybe it's a difference in the way television was being made in the 80s and 90s. Maybe it's a difference in how much attention you can expect from the audience. Maybe it's just a difference in what the audience expected. I mean, what we learned about Worf today, it's weird. He was actually a much more fleshed out character in this episode than he was any time in season 1. There's a fantastic cut. There's a fantastic cut somewhere on YouTube, and I'm sorry I don't have it. It might actually be on our Facebook page, though, of all of the times that Picard and Riker just shut Worf down.
Right.
And a lot of them were actually, I think, from the first season where Worf would say something and Picard would just be like, no.
Nope. Put away the phaser, mister.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of all we got, with the exception of a couple of episodes, like Tasha's last episode. Was that her name?
Tasha Yar.
Something like that.
Right.
Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah. In Tasha's last episode, we actually get a little bit more character than we had gotten from Worf to that point. And, I mean, it was actually, I think, just written to make it more poignant when Tasha, dies. But, I mean, it was neat to see that little bit of growth. We're seeing more growth from Worf here, which is why I'm okay with there not being a payoff right at the end of the episode, because my assumption is that we're going to get... that this is part of fleshing out this cast and crew.
It is, but it also, to me, it felt like a little bit of a left turn, because in Skin of Evil, we've got Worf having some real camaraderie with his fellow crewmate, with Tasha. Too bad she's gone, within a few minutes. But then in this, it's just like, all right, who assigned the dangerous person to be the head of security? Not that the head of security shouldn't be tough and shouldn't be willing to fight and willing to defend. But you and I have talked about this before with at nightclubs, you actually shouldn't be aware of the security that's there.
Right.
It's like that only happens every now and then, where the security kind of comes out of the darkness and gets rid of the problem and then, goes away. It's like the Secret Service, The Secret Service, they're kind of there, and they're kind of this quiet presence who you don't mess with. But in this, we seem to be building up this thing about Worf being a little unhinged. And then I wondered, by the end of this episode, is somebody going to sit down with Worf and say, hey, take it easy, dude.
All right. I'm not saying that this is what's happening today, but I have often wondered on Next Gen if every character isn't part of a whole. Like, if the Enterprise isn't us. And I don't mean if the crew of the Enterprise isn't us. I mean, is the Enterprise us? And so we've got all these different things. We've got the feeling part and that's represented by Troy. We've got the fight or flight. Well, actually, we got fight, and that's represented by Worf. I know and we got the logical part, and that's Data, and then hopefully the whole thing comes together in Picard. And then I'm leaving out a bunch of characters there, but I wonder if you're not giving him a little bit of short shrift, instead of looking at this as, why is Worf such an idiot? If we maybe don't look at him as part of a bigger organism, that's supposed to represent every one of us flying through space.
I think that's a totally valid way to look at it. Okay. I just feel like within this episode, because we've had other elements of Worf and other growth from Worf before, I feel like in this episode, all we're focusing on is that he will become unhinged. Well, he will become a bit unbalanced. He already stood up to the other Klingons who showed up. And sort of differentiated himself. He said, look, I may have this in my blood, but I'm also loyal, and I kind of am happy with the life I have carved out for myself. Even if I'm not 100% like these other people that I serve with, I know how to band together for a common goal and a common cause here. And now we just have this other side of Worf where it's like, oh, okay, he might also kill Riker.
Well, who hasn't thought about it, really?
Well, who hasn't?
No, I mean, I wonder, honestly, and this might be worth researching. I wonder if this isn't part of Roddenberry's already not as involved in season 2, right?
He still is, but we've had more of a changeover in writing staff, and
because in season 1, I mean, there was the edict that there is to be no conflict, among members of the crew, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't imagine that this would have flown in season 1 at least, because in season 2 now we do have this character who might go nutty,
right?
And not because he's been taken over by an alien anything, or not because has been reprogrammed, but just because he might go nutty. Right. And so it seems like, I mean, this might just be, I don't want to say the show getting away from Gene Roddenberry, because I don't know the history of it. But, I mean, there seems to be a bit more of an evolution of ideas that would have been verboten in season 1. I got to say, I like this episode a lot. I will also admit the first time I watched it, I got distracted and started doing other things. It's very slow.
It is.
And yet, the second time I watched it, when I was like, you've got to like pay attention, I was surprised how quickly it went. I mean, so I liked it overall, although it's sort of a weird recommendation to say, yeah, the first time I checked out. But the second time it was awesome because the first time I did check out. But I shouldn't say it's slow exactly, but not a lot happens. And yet there's a lot going on. And I know that doesn't sound like it makes any sense, but that's sort of how I felt about it. Can I do the message?
Yeah,
Can
sure.
I do what my message? What the message I saw?
Sure. I will not hold you back.
I was
on.
absolutely amazed to find out in your trivia that some of the writers, or one of the writers from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, was in this, because the message that I pulled out of this, and I got it in quotes and everything, how we deal with death is at least as important as how we deal with life. Wouldn't you agree? That's it. I mean, that's what, and this whole episode actually is kind of a Kobayashi Maru. That is, of course, the line that Kirk presented to Saavik when Saavik was asking about, what's the point of the Kobayashi Maru? There's no way to win. Everybody's going to die. And Kirk's like, hey, look, how you deal with death, I mean, that's just as important as everything else you do, isn't it? And of course, Saavik hadn't thought of that. And that to me was exactly what we were going through here.
Yeah. By the way, totally easy for Kirk to say. Yeah.
Always is. Because he's never had to deal with it, right? He's always just sort of patted himself on the back. He's cheated it. He's yeah. You can go back and listen to that episode if you want to. It's kind of awesome.
Right.
What about you, though? Were there other messages that you picked up? Do you agree with that one? What?
Well, I do agree with you. I mean, I think that is the big fat message sitting on top of this episode. And I think that's very cool because we get to explore the idea of death, at least through Picard's eyes there. It was an interesting conversation, like you said, with the avatars of Data and Deanna. So I thought all of that was really great. I thought that they were going to delve a little more into this idea of the scientific experiment gone wrong, but that's not really what this episode is about. It just sort of serves as an interesting backdrop for how we frame what Nagilum is doing to this crew. But I did jot down Nagilum's sort of final monologue that he shares with Picard when his face appears on Picard's laptop in the ready room.
Yep.
He says, you seem to find no tranquility in anything. You struggle against the inevitable. You thrive on conflict. You're selfish, yet you value loyalty. You're rash, quick to judge, yet slow to change. It's amazing you survived. We have no common ground. You're too aggressive. And I thought, how many times has an alien, powerful entity said that to Kirk, or at least thought it to Kirk? And then I thought, well, here's Star Trek again, showing us this snapshot of humanity and maybe exposing those flaws and saying, well, yeah, maybe we are kind of like this. But as Star Trek The Next Generation has done compared to Star Trek the original series, it's trying to show, look, in time we'll get better. In time, we may not overcome any of that stuff 100%, but we will try to be better than we were the day before. And if you are like Captain Kirk, you may still be a barbarian, but you choose not to kill today. So I had hoped that Nagilum would have at least picked that up from his brief interaction with these humans and with the library computer of the Enterprise, to show that humans may have these things as flaws, and they may be horrible contradictions, that they're not finding tranquility, that they are struggling against the inevitable and thriving on conflict and all of this stuff. But progress still has been made. And hopefully maybe this is a more enlightened, slightly better adjusted crew and better adjusted version of humanity. So, yeah, I thought of Kirk, as did you. Yeah. Kind of interesting. I am, of course, as we often are, I'm curious what everybody else thought of as well. Would you like to tell people how to get in touch with us, or shall I, sir? I would love to, Ken, because there are many good ways for you to find us. In social media, Facebook, Skype, and Twitter, you can reach us at Mission Log Pod. All three places, Mission Log Pod is our handle. You can call us at 323-522-5641. You can email us, missionlog@roddenberry.com. And our show website, including our discovered documents, is at missionlogpodcast.com. And we have two great distributors, partners who carry our show, trekmovie.com and Trek FM, which is trek.fm, where you'll find us and a ton of great other podcasts. So please do check them out. And remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log. So try to keep the comments relatively short. Sometimes we get fabulous, fabulous comments, but they're very long, and we can't always narrow them down. So short to the point comments, we really appreciate it because all of your comments are awesome. Thank you.
Next week, Elementary, Dear Data.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com, and from the album Messages by Key Theory, free to download at kitheory.com. If the darkness governed by Nagilum is without matter, energy, or boundary, if it does not in fact exist, then can these things have happened? Was there even a show today? I will be back to blow your mind again next week. End transmission.